You can go ahead and keep your places in Jeremiah chapter 1. In Jeremiah chapter 1, you can stay there for just a moment. I want to start out by saying thank you for everyone being here this morning. Also thankful for the elders giving me this opportunity to come and speak to everyone. I'm also thankful for all the support that I've been given this morning. A lot of friends that's come out to hear me preach the Word of God, and I'm just so thankful for them. A lot of friends that I have here, and especially my family. Both of my brother and sister kind of surprised me this morning. I didn't know they were coming, so it was a good surprise to get to see them. So, and as well, all of my brothers and sisters in Christ as well, coming out here this morning to worship God together. So, I want to start out by talking about the life of Jeremiah. I kind of gave it away in the reading this morning, but he is called the weeping prophet, Jeremiah. And my goal is to not really give y'all and teach about the whole book of Jeremiah, not about some of the poetry, not give you some description. I'm definitely not qualified for that. But I want us to just kind of look at the story of Jeremiah. I want us to look at Jeremiah's life. I want us to look at what he went through as a person. Some of the things he went through, maybe we're going through. Some of the things that Jeremiah has felt, maybe we are feeling. And I want us to kind of take some lessons this morning and apply them to our lives as we look at the prophet Jeremiah. I got to talk to Mr. Wayne before this, and if y'all are okay with having a 3 o'clock lunch, I'll read the whole book. But I don't think we're going to do that this morning. So let's kind of start out by talking about his background. Jeremiah means Jehovah establishes or Jehovah exalts. Who was Jeremiah? Well, he was the son of a high priest, Hilkiah. He was also a prophet that was sent by God to declare doom on Judah. And he was the only Old Testament prophet instructed to not marry. So he lived a lonely life. He also had, and his message to Judah was that the Babylonians were coming, and they couldn't avoid it. And Jeremiah chapter 25 says that Jeremiah talks to them and says, destruction is coming, but they would not listen to him. So as we talked about, he had no immediate family. He did not marry. He was instructed not to marry by God. Now, some of the other prophets and kings of his time, you got Nahum, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Daniel, Ezekiel. Those were along the same time period. They were kind of prophesying at the same time as Jeremiah. Some of the kings, Josiah, kind of later on in Josiah's, maybe right in the middle towards the end of Josiah's reign as king, Jeremiah has stepped in, and that's when he started prophesying. So I want us to look at some of these dates to kind of help jog our memory and maybe help us kind of look through these dates so we can kind of visually see, and I'll throw up a map here in just a minute, visually see kind of where Jeremiah was and the time periods of when he was prophesying. So in 627 to 605 BC, that's when Assyria and Egypt were threatening Jerusalem, were threatening Judah. And they were kind of pressing in on them, almost just like kind of squashing them or really trying to overtake them. And then in 605 to 586 BC, Babylon came in and wiped all of them out. Just wiped out Assyria and Egypt, and then finally took over Judah as well. And then in 586 to 580 BC, that's when he administered in Jerusalem and Egypt after Judah's downfall. So we see Jeremiah's prophecy and his ministry was from 627 BC all the way to 580 BC, around maybe 50 years or so. But that was kind of the timeline that he had prophesied. And I think there was a map on this. Yes. So we see of Ezekiel and Daniel, also the contemporary prophets as well. And then we see Jeremiah. So that's where Jeremiah was prophesying in Jerusalem. And then we have Daniel over here, who was in Babylon, who was in the king's palace. He was in the royal palace where he had prophesied. And then Ezekiel, just a little south of him, from Daniel. But Ezekiel was also in Babylon as well, just not in the palace like Daniel was. So hopefully we can kind of get an idea of just where Jeremiah was, what the dates were, and kind of who he was. Now, as we're talking about who he was, let's look at some characters. Let's look at some characteristics, that Jeremiah has. One of the reasons I absolutely love this book is because of just who Jeremiah is and the love that he had for the people, the love that he had for God. It was crazy and big, the amount of love that he had for the people in God. I really love Mr. Allen. He is such a great man, and he is doing great work here. And I've been able to study with him and Isaac Hall as well through the book of Jeremiah. So this is a little fresh on my memory, but if y'all don't like the sermon, then you know who to blame. So, but he's done an excellent job with us, just helping us go through the book, reading it word for word, and help applying it to our lives and seeing this clearly and being able to interpret this in the way that God would want us to. So Jeremiah, some of his characteristics, he was a strong man with tenderness who had a lot of suffering, sympathy for God and man as well. His self-sacrifice was incredible, especially for the people who did not care to listen to him. We'll touch on that here in just a minute. But God instructed Jeremiah to proclaim a bold message to the people. And Jeremiah did this because of his love for God and the people. That's why Jeremiah did this. He was timid, as we talked about in chapter 1 in the reading. He was a timid man, but he was instructed by God to proclaim the word. And so now that we know the background of who Jeremiah is, now I want us to look at some of the lessons and some of the things that Jeremiah went through and how we can learn from him and learn from how he thoroughly and carefully handled being in the position he was as a prophet of God. So, firstly, I want us to look at Jeremiah's lonely life. How he had a lonely life. I'm in the middle of a book called The Cost of Discipleship. The writer was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Some of you may know him. He was a German martyr, and he died around 1945, and he lived to only be 39 years old. And he was a German pastor and theologian, and he devoted his whole life to proclaiming Christ. He had moved over later in his life to the United States to get away from Hitler and the Nazis, but then he went back over to Germany to proclaim Christ because he did not feel that he should leave his countrymen alone and that he should be persecuted and proclaim Christ. One of the quotes that he had that I really loved is he said, "Let him who cannot be alone beware of community. He will only do harm to himself and to the community. Alone you stood before God when He called you. Alone you had to answer that call. Alone you had to struggle and pray. And alone you will die and give an account to God." What all did Bonhoeffer have to go through? I mean, he was preaching a message amongst much persecution during that time. The Nazis were pressing hard. Hitler was pressing hard during this time. We all know of that story. But he was preaching an unpopular opinion to these people. And it would have been scary to do something like that. Did Jeremiah not also deal with this same type of loneliness? Did he not deal with these same types of things? In Jeremiah chapter 16, it says, "The word of the Lord came to me, you shall not take a wife, nor shall you have sons or daughters in this place. For thus says the Lord concerning the sons and daughters who were born in this place, and concerning the mothers who bore them, and the fathers who fathered them in this land, they shall die of deadly diseases. They shall not be lamented, nor shall there be buried. They shall be as dung on the surface of the ground. They shall perish by the sword and by famine, and their dead bodies shall be food for the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." So Jeremiah had dealt with this type of loneliness. The one person that Jeremiah had was Baruch. That was his scribe who had wrote for him. They had went into exile together later on in chapter, I think it was 45, that it talks about Baruch. But that was the only person that Jeremiah had that was close to him, a close friend that he had. You've got kings, priests, rulers, common people. All of them opposed Jeremiah and opposed his message that he had to give. It was a lonely life, serving God. Well, look at the attitude Jeremiah had in chapter 9, in verse 1 and 2. Oh, that my head were waters, and my eyes a fountain of tears, that I might weep day and night for the slain of the daughter of my people. Oh, that I had in the desert a traveler's lodging place, that I might leave my people and go away from them. For they are all adulterers, a company of treacherous men. So discouraged Jeremiah was, so discouraged. And would you not feel the same way if no one would listen to you? Sometimes we might feel that we might be the only Christians in this world. It reminds me of the story of Elijah when he felt that he was the only one trying to do right. Do we feel that way sometimes? Do we feel like maybe we don't have any family that's supporting us? We don't have any friends that's supporting us? That we're the only Christians in this world that's trying to do right? Well, I have a brother and a sister that came this morning to hear me. I have brothers and sisters in Christ to come and hear me. I have lots of friends here this morning. I have tons of support. Sometimes I might feel lonely, and sometimes I might feel alone that God is not answering me. And sometimes we might feel that way. But look at Jeremiah's life. He was lonely, but he had a job, and he had a message to give to the people, and that was commanded by God. And we're blessed with so much family. We're blessed with a good country. And help us to not forget that we have Christians in this world. We have many churches around this area that is trying to do right and serve God. Well, let's look at Jeremiah chapter 6 and verse 10. I skipped over that passage. Jeremiah chapter 6 and verse 10. That one's not on the screen. Jeremiah chapter 6 and verse 10. To whom shall I speak and give warning that they may hear? Behold, their ears are uncircumcised, and they cannot listen. Behold, the word of the Lord is to them an object of scorn. They take no pleasure in it. His attitude, again, is just discouraged because the people will not listen to him. So now I want us to look at, secondly, Jeremiah had a message to give. Jeremiah had a message to give the people. And what was his message? As we talked about, it was destruction on Jerusalem, destruction of Judah, that they were coming into captivity. I don't think I have this on the screen. I do, actually. In 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verse 15 and 16, the Lord, the God of their fathers, sent persistently to them by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they kept mocking the messengers of God, despising his words, scoffing at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, until there was no remedy. Would that not have been discouraging, as said with 2 Chronicles? The people would not listen to God. They would not listen to the people that God sent. Jeremiah, the rest of the prophets, Ezekiel, Daniel. He sent them to deliver a message. The people would not listen. And God was even going to lighten the punishment. When they were taken into captivity, he had promised that, I understand that you will be into captivity, but the punishment could be lighter. But they didn't listen, and they still would not listen. Even his own countrymen wouldn't listen to Jeremiah. The false teachers would mock him in his day. There was evil everywhere, and it was discouraging to Jeremiah. But the message that Jeremiah had was also twofold. It was destruction and construction. As we read, as in chapter 1, where we were in Jeremiah chapter 1, in verse 10, it says a little later in the verses, See, I have set you this day over nations and over kingdoms, to pluck up and to break down, to destroy, and to overthrow, to build up, and to plant. So it's twofold. He's going to destroy, there will be destruction, but did God not make a promise? There was going to be construction. Later on, He was going to save His people. And as we see, God is a consistent God. He keeps His promises. He always does. I think I had two different passages. Jeremiah chapter 31 and verse 31 through 34. I have two passages on the screen here after this one. This is just talking about how God was not going to forsake His people. And these words can be comforting to us as Christians as well. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, declares the Lord, I will put my law within them. I will write on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. We talked about in Bible class, Mr. Olson's talking about how knowing the Lord. Did these people know the Lord? They didn't. They didn't listen. Jeremiah chapter 32 and verse 37 through 41. Behold, I will gather them from all the countries to which I drove them in my anger and my wrath in great indignation. I will bring them back to this place, and I will make them dwell in safety. They shall be my people, and I will be their God. I will give them one heart and one way, and they may fear me forever, for their own good and the good of their children after them. I will make with them an everlasting covenant, and I will not turn away from doing good to them. And I will put fear of me in their hearts, that they may not turn from me. I will rejoice in doing them good, and I will plant them in this land of faithfulness, with all my heart and with all my soul. As we see in both of these passages, God says that He will keep His promise, and He will save them in the end. What is our message? What is the message that we have? It reminds me of the hymn, Into Our Hands. Into our hands the gospel's given. We have a message given by God. Us Christians, we have the Word right here in our hands that's given to us. What are we going to do with it? Are we going to share it to others? Are we going to make sure that anyone we come in contact with, if we have opportunities that come up, that we're going to share the gospel with them? Into our hands the gospel's given. And the gospel is what? The good news. It's for everyone. It's positive news. I mean, would you not want to tell people that? The good news? That's what it means, that the gospel means. We don't need to get discouraged also when people might not listen to the message that we're given. We're given a message by God to proclaim to others that the Lord is coming. Destruction is coming to this world, and this world is not our home. We cannot get discouraged when people won't listen. Jeremiah went through the same thing. Everyone was against Jeremiah, but Baruch. He had no support from family because he didn't have any. He had no friends but one. He was alone, but he had a message to give the people. And he had a message because he was a prophet that was commanded by God to share that message with the people. And now we see, thirdly, that no one would listen to him. Have you ever had a moment where you're trying to talk to somebody, whether you're talking to them about work, instructing them to do something, or just talking to a friend, and they got something on their mind? You know, sometimes if I'm trying to talk to somebody and text at the same time, I will just have to tell them, look, it's going in one ear and out the other. I'm not listening to you. I can't hear you. And sometimes it's frustrating when we're trying to talk to somebody and they just don't listen to us. They don't care what we have to say. Whether it be that small thing or something big, like trying to teach them the gospel, trying to preach to them about the good news, and they just won't listen to us. They don't care what we have to say. And they're just ready to be done with that conversation that they're having with you. it's frustrating, and it's tiring, it's exhausting, and it's discouraging when you're talking to somebody about the gospel, when you're trying to teach somebody, and you know they are not hearing a word that you just said. It's discouraging. And for me, this probably the most thing is it's exhausting, is I don't ever really want to talk to them again or tell them something because they're not listening to me in the first place. Is that not how Jeremiah felt? And we read this earlier in Jeremiah 6 and verse 10. To whom shall I speak and give warning that they may hear? Their ears are uncircumcised. They can't listen. Behold, the word of the Lord is to them an object of scorn. They take no pleasure in it. He's giving them warning, but he's saying their ears are uncircumcised. They can't listen. They won't listen. In Jeremiah 7 and verse 13. And now, because you have done all these things, declares the Lord, and when I spoke to you persistently, you did not listen. When I called you, you didn't answer. Jeremiah is saying, we've tried. We've continued persistently. We've kept trying, and you won't listen. In verse 25 and 26 of that same chapter, from the day that your fathers came out of the land of Egypt to this day, I have persistently sent all my servants, the prophets, to them, day after day, yet they did not listen to me or incline their ear, but stiffened their necks. They did worse than their fathers. That word continuously occurs here, persistently, but they didn't listen. And then in Jeremiah 26 and verse 5, and to listen to the words of my servants, the prophets, whom I send to you urgently, though you have not listened. And there's many other passages in Jeremiah, in the book of Jeremiah, that talks about how the people will not listen to the word of the Lord. And we also need to make sure we're watching out for wolves in sheep's clothing. Some of the false teachers that Jeremiah had to deal with. We deal with those same problems. We're trying to teach somebody the gospel, and we're trying to teach them the message, and yet you have some other opinion coming in and saying, this is what you need to do. This is what's right. That would have been frustrating to Jeremiah. Look over in Jeremiah chapter 20 and verse 14 through 18. This is Jeremiah's attitude for how those false teachers would come in and give another opinion, and how those people would not listen to Jeremiah. Cursed be the day on which I was born. This kind of reminds me of Job. Cursed be the day on which I was born, the day when my mother bore me. Let it not be blessed. Cursed be the man who brought the news to my father. A son is born to you, making him very glad. Let that man be like the cities that the Lord overthrew without pity. Let him hear a cry in the morning and an alarm at noon, because he did not kill me in the womb. So my mother would have not been my grave. So my mother would have been my grave, and her womb forever great. Why did I come out of the womb to see toil and sorrow and spend my days in shame? That's sad. That's a sad verse to hear that Jeremiah says. It's discouraging to hear Jeremiah's words in that. Jeremiah chapter 20, verse 9, it says that he could not keep from proclaiming the word of the Lord. I don't think I put that on there. You don't have to turn there, but Jeremiah 20 and verse 9, he had a message to give the people. Even though they would not listen, he couldn't hold it within himself. Jeremiah 20, verse 9, if I say I will not mention His name or speak any more in His name, talking about the Lord, there is in my heart, as it were, a burning fire shut up in my bones, and I am weary with holding it in. I cannot. So it seems like he was a little more tired of holding in the Word of God and not preaching that versus the people not listening to them. That hurt him more than the people not listening, was holding that Word in that God had given to him to preach and teach the people. And people will try to oppose us, as we talked about earlier. Jeremiah 7, verse 8, behold, you trust in deceptive words to no avail. Chapter 7, verse 8. Chapter 8, verse 11, they have healed the wound of my people lightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. As I said earlier, that would have been frustrating to hear outside opinions saying, listen, there's peace in the land. There's no need to worry, when Jeremiah knows what's about to happen, and the people will not listen to him. And another thing I wanted to look at is just, so we sit here and say, well, was it really that bad? how bad was it? I mean, Jeremiah's complaining. He says all these things about, I wish I was dead before I was even born. I wish all of these things. I wish all of these bad things had happened to me. I wish I didn't have to give this message. Let's look how bad it really was. In Jeremiah chapter 7 and verse 30 through 34. This is a very gruesome passage to me when you think about just how evil the people were. And the actions that they were doing were just awful. In Jeremiah chapter 7, I put this on the screen as well, in verse 30 through 34. Listen closely to the action and the evil deeds of the people. For the sons of Judah, they have done evil in my sight, declares the Lord. They have set their detestable things in the house that is called by my name to defile it. And they have built the high places of Topheth, which is the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I did not command them, nor did it come into my mind. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when it will no more be called Topheth, or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. For they will bury in Topheth, because there is no room elsewhere. And the dead bodies of this people will be food for the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and none will frighten them away. And I will silence in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, for the land shall become a waste. That's pretty gruesome, isn't it? They were literally killing their sons and daughters. They were killing babies. I mean, it's like abortion now. It's literally what they were doing. They were chopping off the heads of babies, of their sons and daughters, and they were committing human sacrifices. Is that not just terrible? Is that not awful? That's how bad it was in Jeremiah's days. So maybe a little, you could kind of sympathize with Jeremiah and understand that his attitude that he had would have been discouraged. And I would have been discouraged as well. Speaking to those evil people. Of course you don't want to warn them. I mean, don't you want them to get what they deserve for doing that to people, their own sons and daughters? I mean, I would rather them be killed, go into captivity, endure the worst punishment. But that's not what God says. God had a different plan. And He commanded Jeremiah to speak to them and warn them. Of course it would have been tiring for Jeremiah. I put this on the screen, Jeremiah chapter 12, verse 1 through 4, just talking about how exhausted he is, another passage. Righteous are you, O Lord, when I complain to you, yet I would plead my case before you. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why do all who are treacherous thrive? You plant them, and they take root. They grow and produce fruit. You are near in their mouth and far from their heart. But you, O Lord, know me. You see me, and you test my heart toward you. Pull them out like sheep from the slaughter, and set them apart for the day of slaughter. How long will the land mourn, and the grass of every field wither? For the evil of those who dwell in the beasts and the birds are swept away, because they said, He will not see our latter end. He will not see our latter end. Jeremiah is just telling him, God, do away with them. Why won't you just do away? Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why are you letting them survive? Give them what they deserve. But God made a promise. In Jeremiah chapter 12, verse 5 through 6, this is God's answer to Jeremiah's complaint. And this is just the verse over. If you have raced with men on foot, and they have wearied you, how will you compete with horses? And if in a safe land you are so trusting, what will you do in the thicket of the Jordan? For even your brothers in the house of your father, even if they have dealt treacherously with you, they are in full cry after you. Do not believe them, though they speak friendly words to you. It's funny. As Mr. Allen kind of said when we went through this verse, God's almost telling Jeremiah to basically say, hey, suck it up, buttercup. I mean, listen, things are going to get worse. You know, if you think this is hard right now, I don't think you're going to be ready for what's to come. He's basically just telling Jeremiah that I don't know if you're ready, if you're going to act like this and you're going to complain like this and have this attitude towards them. So Jeremiah became frustrated and tired. And like I said, he basically told Jeremiah to suck it up because times will get more difficult. But it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if nobody listens to us. It doesn't matter if, well, in a sense it does matter because we want to share the gospel with others. But ultimately, we have God on our side. God's going to listen to us. He's going to listen to what we have to say. He will hear our prayers. It may not be His will. It will be His will, but it may not be the way we want things to turn out. But He will listen to us. And He's a God of love, and He keeps His promise. And so, in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 12 through 13, this is kind of the last passage I wanted to discuss, was, "Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." We need to seek God with all of our heart. When we seek Him with all of our heart, He will hear us. He will listen to us. He will listen to our plea. And we could take comfort in that fact. So as we talked about in Jeremiah's life, Jeremiah was lonely. He had no family. He had no support but one man, Baruch. He lived a lonely life. But he counted on God. God would listen to him. And think about those who aren't Christians this morning. Think about the people that Jeremiah was speaking to and giving that message. Those were the people who were lonely. Those were the real lonely people, not Jeremiah, because they did not have God. Think about how, secondly, Jeremiah had a message to give them. He was alone. No one would listen to him, not even his own countrymen. But he had a message to give. He was focused on God. He was focused on the job that God gave him. And he continued to warn the people, even though they were evil. We're given the gospel, and it's in our hands. We have a message to give others. And what are we going to do with that message? And then finally, think about how no one would listen to Jeremiah, not even his own countrymen, the people he cared for. That discouraged Jeremiah greatly. But ultimately, God was listening. God was listening to Jeremiah, and God was with Jeremiah. We need to stay motivated as Christians to bring others to Christ. We need to stay motivated to preach the gospel. What am I doing this morning? I'm preaching to those who aren't Christians. I'm trying to bring others to Christ. That's ultimately our goal here on this earth as Christians. It's going to be tiring, just as it was for Jeremiah. But remember the life that Jeremiah lived. Remember the pain that he went through. We're given the gospel. What are we going to do with it? We need to continue because we can, like I said, take comfort in the fact that God is listening. So praise God for the life that Jeremiah lived, the great life that he lived, to be a great example to us. And also we think about, in Matthew chapter 16, he talks about how some of them thought that when Jesus was in this world, that was Jeremiah. They saw some of the same characteristics in Jesus as was in Jeremiah. And Jeremiah came to rescue the people. We talked a lot about Jeremiah's characteristics, kind of similar to Jesus and what he went through. Jeremiah came to rescue the people. But Jesus comes to rescue you. He came to rescue all of us. So this morning, what are we going to do? Are we going to listen to Jesus? As we stand and sing the invitation song.
I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peace.